This episode contains descriptions of sexual assault. If you need help, call 1-800-RESPECT. When Justice Michael Lee handed down his judgment in the huge defamation court case between Bruce Lehrmann and Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson, Australia lit up with people asking questions. Today, we're going to answer some of those for you. Justice Lee found Bruce Lehrmann raped his former Liberal Party colleague, Brittany Higgins. That gave 10 a legal victory, but it wasn't a total win.
Mr. Lehrmann raped Miss Higgins. I hasten to stress this is a finding on the balance of probability.
Kristen Amiot is the producer of The Front, and like me, she's been glued to every minute of this trial. Chrissy, Bruce Lehrmann was charged and tried for the rape of Brittany Higgins in 2022, but he was never criminally convicted because that trial was aborted due to juror misconduct. And then the charges were dropped because prosecutors said Brittany Higgins' mental health was too fragile for another trial. But now that he's been found to be a rapist by a judge, can criminal charges be refiled, and are they likely to be?
The short answer to that question is no, and that's because of a crucial legal principle called double jeopardy. That means once you've been tried for an offence, you can't be tried again, irrespective of what the verdict was in the original trial. But as with a lot of legal principles, there is an exception to the rule, and that's when fresh and compelling evidence surfaces that wasn't presented in the first trial. So that means if prosecutors wanted to have another go at Bruce Lehrmann, they'd have to find a whole new witness or a video or a piece of evidence that they didn't have the first time around. That's looking pretty unlikely at this stage, given Justice Lee's exhaustive investigation of the evidence presented in the defamation trial.
Justice Lee was quick to stress that his finding of rape was on the balance of probabilities. Tell me a bit about that. Why is that significant?
What Justice Lee is talking about there is the burden of proof required for him to make findings one way or another. The burden of proof is naturally lower in civil proceedings like defamation trials than it is in criminal trials for serious crimes like rape or murder, where a case has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In those cases, the defendant's guilt has to be clearly and irrefutably established through evidence presented by the prosecution. And that means a judge or a jury can't be left with any lingering questions after both sides have closed their case. In a civil case like this defamation trial, the test is on the balance of probabilities, as we said. That means the judge's job is to find the most likely scenario. And in this case, he's found that on the balance of probabilities, Bruce Lehrmann raped Brittany Higgins. Okay, Justice Lee found that Brittany Higgins was telling the truth about being raped by Bruce Lehrmann, but he found she'd lied about a bunch of other things, including on the night in question. What's that about?
Yeah, the judge found that both Brittany Higgins and Bruce Lehrmann told lies both before and during the trial. But he said that while Bruce Lehrmann seemed to lie about everything, he called it disorganised lying, Brittany Higgins had lied for quite clear reasons. He said that the lies she told in 2019 were understandable lies in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic incident. She was embarrassed about how much she'd drunk and about why she'd come back into Parliament after hours. You can see in her messages at the time that she's very slow to use the word rape and in fact doesn't tell anyone for several days that there'd been sexual intercourse. The judge found that by 2021, when she was sitting down with the project, Brittany Higgins was telling lies designed to convince the journos that she had been the victim of a big political cover-up. She said she'd been victimised and excluded in the office, that she'd been told she'd have no job if she kept pursuing the rape complaint, and that she just got no sympathy from anyone. In fact, her own messages, once the police retrieved them from her phone, showed that that wasn't true. She was thanking people like her former boss, Fiona Brown, for all her support at the time. About the night in question, the judge found Brittany Higgins told a number of lies in the project interview and in the witness box. She lied about her Bumble date, Nick, when she said that he was basically bullied out of the pub by the group she and Lehrmann were drinking with. The judge said that just wasn't true, that actually she abandoned Nick to chat with Bruce Lehrmann. Here's what the judge said about that.
After being forsaken like a shag on the rock for an extended period and despite making successful attempts to interact with some of the group at the larger table, Nick understandably left the dock, no doubt ruining swiping right.
The judge also found Brittany Higgins was lying when she said she didn't really engage romantically or sexually with Bruce Lehrmann at 88 MPH, a karaoke bar, that night. A witness, Lauren Gain, gave evidence she saw them pashing and putting their hands all over each other. Both Higgins and Lehrmann denied this. The judge said they were both lying. He said it was clear Lehrmann wanted to have sex with Higgins and that Higgins was not telling the truth when she said she just passively accepted Lehrmann's overtures without reciprocating.
The submission made by Network 10 that Ms Gaines' account is entirely consistent with Ms Higgins' account is, with respect, silly. One does not pash passively.
The judge also didn't believe either Bruce or Brittany's story about why they got in the Uber together to go to Parliament. He said Bruce lied when he said Brittany told him she wanted to go back to Parliament to work, just like Bruce. And he said Brittany lied when she said she agreed to share a ride because she thought Bruce's home was in the same direction as hers. The judge said they both agreed to go back to Parliament for another purpose, most likely to drink whiskey that Bruce Lehrmann had been talking about, even though Lehrmann's motive all along was to have sex with Brittany Higgins.
And what about the actual sex? Brittany Higgins said in that project interview that she woke up mid-rape and just kept saying no on a loop.
Yeah, the judge said he believed she did wake up on that sofa with Bruce Lehrmann on top of her, but that it was unlikely she kept saying no. The reason he believed that is that after the incident, Brittany Higgins was very tentative about saying this was rape, and she didn't mention saying no to anyone. She told an ex-boyfriend she didn't think it was consensual, and she told another colleague it would have been like fucking a log because she was so drunk. The claim of saying no didn't emerge until 2021 when she was talking to the project.
Yeah, in speaking to friends and colleagues about this after the judgment was handed down on Monday, one of my friends put this to me in a really interesting way. She said it was fascinating to watch Justice Lee's reframing of the consent question from did Brittany Higgins consent to having sex with Bruce Lehrmann to did Bruce Lehrmann care if Brittany Higgins could or did consent in the end.
Yeah, and this is the way Australian laws about consent are changing all across the country. Various jurisdictions are changing that law so that the onus is not on the alleged victim to fight the person off. In fact, the onus is on the alleged perpetrator to make sure that there is consent, that it is active, that it is ongoing. So what about Brittany Higgins' fiancé, David Shiraz? We saw him coming in and out of court a lot. We've seen him by Brittany Higgins' side when they moved to France, for example. They do a lot of lovey-dovey posts on Instagram. What did the judge say about his role in all of this?
The judge has been really curious about David Shiraz all the way through the trial. At one point, he likened him to the prophet Elijah, saying that there was a seat for him at the Passover table, but he never showed up. And that's because he was asking both sides why they weren't calling him to give evidence. And he had a lot to say about him in the judgment. David Shiraz was the one who went to Lisa Wilkinson with a story that he'd called a, quote, Liberal Party Me Too project pitch. In his messages and conversations with the project team, he made it clear this was a story of a political cover-up and he wanted it to come out very soon before Scott Morrison had a chance to call an election. That's because he wanted the Labor Party to ask questions about it in question time during Parliament. And if Morrison called the election, Parliament would rise and Labor wouldn't get that opportunity to hammer the issue. The judge said his motivations were clear. He wanted to cause political damage to the government, and he criticised Lisa Wilkinson and the producer Angus Llewellyn for not being more sceptical about the whole story for that reason. The project story was all about a political cover-up by the Morrison government. In the end, Claire, did that stack up?
No. The judge gave that very short shrift. He said there was no evidence of a cover-up, and in fact there was evidence that at least two senior ministers, Linda Reynolds and Alex Hawke, wanted this to go to police as soon as they heard a young staffer was alleging there'd been sexual activity in Parliament House. They ordered Fiona Brown, who was the Chief of Staff in Linda Reynolds' office, that made her both Bruce Lehrmann and Brittany Higgins' boss, to go to the police even if Brittany Higgins didn't want to. Fiona Brown refused, and the judge said that demonstrated she was showing sensitivity to Brittany Higgins and protecting her. Chrissy, I've noticed Lisa Wilkinson hasn't been on TV for a long time, even though 10 said she's still an employee. So where is Lisa?
Well, she was on Monday afternoon on the steps of the courthouse making a statement after Justice Lee handed his judgment down, but she is still an employee of 10. She's just not on air at the moment. After she made that famous speech at the Logies, which the judge was very critical of because it basically endorsed Brittany Higgins' whole story before the matter had gone to court, 10 took her off the project and they promised to give her another show. That hasn't happened, and her contract runs until December of this year, so we'll see if they now find something for her to do. So, Claire, is this a total win for 10?
Not at all. They lost on the major argument about their journalism, which is a defence called qualified privilege. It's pretty complicated, but the qualified privilege defence requires a media outlet to show that they've been reasonable. That is, they made efforts to investigate the claims and they gave the subject of the story a fair right of reply. The judge absolutely slated their journalism. He said they didn't properly investigate the flaws in Brittany's story. They destroyed Fiona Brown's reputation by claiming she was part of a non-existent cover-up, and they were far too willing to jump in on a political smash-up of the Morrison government. I think 10 was very lucky here. It's very lucky for them that she was telling the truth, because if the judge had found that he couldn't accept that she was actually raped, 10 would have been left saying, oh, well, we did everything we could to check out her claims and we really scrutinised her story and we tried to be fair to Bruce Lehrmann. The judge said he just didn't think they were fair or reasonable at all. Okay, Chrissy, Bruce Lehrmann is facing another allegation of sexual assault, this time in Queensland.
Months after he was charged, weeks after he applied to have his identity suppressed, finally the veil of secrecy is shattered. Bruce Lehrmann can be revealed as the man facing 2 counts of rape in Toowoomba.
What, if any, bearing does Monday's judgment have on that case?
Justice Lee's judgment won't have any bearing on the outcome of the Toowoomba case because that would be prejudicial to Bruce Lehrmann. Just because he's been found to have raped one person, it's not fair to suggest he's automatically guilty of the crime he's been accused of in the other matter. And Bruce Lehrmann, just like everybody else, is entitled to a fair trial. What Bruce Lehrmann could do is apply for the case to be heard by a judge alone without a jury. That's what happened to Chris Dawson from The Teacher's Pet story in his murder trial. He asked for a judge alone because he believed jurors would have already made up their minds about him. Bruce Lehrmann could also apply for a stay of the proceedings in Toowoomba based on the publicity about this verdict. So that is, because he's being called a rapist on every front page and all over social media, he could try to convince the Queensland judge he can't possibly get a fair trial.
Coming up, more burning questions. There's a heavy-duty situation unfolding in Sydney where police say terrorism was behind the stabbing of an Orthodox Christian priest. We've got that story live right now at theaustralian.com.au, and you can subscribe to find out what's going on. We'll be back after this break. Chrissy, in handing down his judgment yesterday, Justice Michael Lee said that had he found in Bruce Lehrmann's favour, the most he would have awarded in damages was $20,000. That's not a lot.
If it had been necessary to assess damages in favour of Mr Lehrmann, the appropriate and rational relationship between the actual harm sustained and the damages awarded would lead to total damages of $20,000.
Most people will be aware that any kind of litigation costs a lot more than that. So what do we know about how much this case has actually cost?
A lot has been made about the costs in this case. We heard very early in the piece that Lisa Wilkinson had racked up something in the vicinity of $800,000 in legal fees after engaging her own barrister, Sue Chrysanthu, and that was months ago. Channel 10 didn't want to pay that bill, and that fight became the subject of its own legal spin-off drama, but in the end, 10 was ordered to pay Wilkinson's bills by Justice Lee. The combined bill of 10 and Lisa Wilkinson would be well into the millions of dollars. Their most senior barrister, Matt Collins KC, charges in the vicinity of $12,000 a day. Other silks charge between $6,000 and $8,000 a day, and that's not just court time. It includes all the time they spend writing submissions and talking to witnesses as well.
Bruce Lehrmann's own lawyers are believed to be acting on a no-win, no-fee basis, so he won't have to pay what would have been several millions to them. It is possible that someone pays those barristers some amount of money on his behalf if he has a wealthy benefactor somewhere out there, but it'd be unlikely to cover all those bills. But Ten and Wilkinson's lawyers do want to be paid, and they will make an application that he has to pay their bills. So what do we think will happen there?
We know Bruce Lehrmann doesn't have much money at all. He comes from modest circumstances in Queensland, and he hasn't worked for several years now thanks to the publicity around the project story, as he told the Seven Network in 2022.
Well, who would employ you, Bruce?
Exactly. I agree. After being smeared and slammed, as I have been for the last 2 or 3 years now.
He won a couple of payouts from other media organisations which would have tided him over, but we know he has pretty expensive taste. He likes a party, and in fact, Seven paid his rent for a year to secure that interview. So even if the judge orders him to pay Ten and Wilkinson's legal costs, they may not actually get any money out of him.
We've seen an appeal launched in another high-profile defamation case. That's the legal action brought by ex-SAS soldier Ben Roberts-Smith against the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age newspapers.
A judge found newspapers substantially proved the decorated soldier committed serious war crimes in Afghanistan.
Bruce Lehrmann pursued this case in an attempt to salvage his own reputation, which he said was trashed by Ten's reporting. So should we expect him to appeal Justice Lee's finding too?
It's hard to say at this stage. Neither Bruce Lehrmann nor his lawyers have commented publicly following Monday's verdict, but given the looming costs in this case, we can only speculate that it's a decision he won't be taking lightly.
These two cases have both backfired in pretty major ways for the people who brought them. We'll leave you with Justice Lee summing up Bruce Lehrmann's predicament like this.
Having escaped the lion's den, Mr. Lehrmann made the mistake of coming back for his hat.
Kristen Amiet is the producer of The Front. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to check out all our journalism and subscribe at theaustralian.com.au.